You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is August 8th, 2024 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And today I thought we would talk a little bit about what happens when you explore and discover that achieving goals seems to be rather empty. And this is really one of those exploration conversations and really teasing apart and discerning what's primary exploration and what's secondary exploration. These interferences come quite early in life, so often prior to the sense of self arising. So there's no real contrast that illustrates when our direction into primary exploration has been interfered with, and our exploration is oriented around secondary exploration. So let me just define those terms a little bit. Primary exploration is really where you're pursuing the things that have meaning to you. And meaning is derived in the engagement of the activity of doing whatever the thing is. And that exists in the framework and your relationship to the activity itself. But then you exist in social groups and you exist in our larger culture, and all of those activities that provide meaning for people have values within the social group you're in and also within the wider culture that you're in. We start out, of course, in the value system of the family that we grow up in, and the things that matter to them, our caregivers, that is, and the way that they direct and inform us of what's meaningful is that original definition that we operate from. And then exploration, of course, requires separation and a sense of autonomy in order to be able to engage in it. And depending on your relationship with your caregiver and what the resulting attachment strategy that you develop is, that also impacts quite a bit what your exploration activity is, what's allowed, what's encouraged, what our resources provided for. So secure family systems really do take in what the child's capacities are, what the child's interests are, and often those are the things that are supported and encouraged. So before, 4, 5, 6, 7, when you begin to have a autobiographical memory experience of your life, you've already been engaged in exploration, and you've already been directed, or you've already been interfered with. If you've ever been around small kids, what you notice is that at about 10 or 12 months old, they move from creeping around and crawling around to beginning to balance themselves on 2 feet. And as they gain that balance and that capacity to move on their own, that's when our interests in the world around us and the people around us gets piqued. We begin to explore the bodies that we're in and the things that we can do, the things that we enjoy doing, the challenges that we can meet, all within the frame of that family system and that encouragement or inhibition that we experience. if you grow up in that secure family system where you're encouraged really to find the things that matter to you, find the things that you're good at, find the things that you want to do, and that's what's provided for you, then you always have this framework of orienting toward the gathering of a sense of meaning in life. And if you don't have that, then it affects it in different ways. The avoidant child, so the anxious avoidant child who grows up to be the dismissing adult, there's a sense of neglect in that. And also, there is a training in an idealizing view of what's actually happening in the family system. And that really includes stripping out anything negative that might be expressed. And the child needs to orient toward the things that matter to the caregiver, because that's how they get a response from the caregiver. So their own, when we say neglect, what we mean is their own needs, their own desires, their own interests, their own abilities are neglected in favor of what the caregivers find meaningful. And so the child begins to orient themselves toward that. And the better they do at that, the more accomplished they become at that, the better the response is from their caregivers. And so they really do get oriented in tracking what the value systems are of the people that they need something from, and getting good at eliciting that from them so that they can then present themselves in a way that would elicit a response from the other person that they want, which is also about getting their needs met in that way. This is quite different than the secure family system where you express yourself authentically, and the family system delights in who you are and what matters to you and are encouraging of that. And in the family system where you grow up being a dismissing adult, none of what is authentic and none of what really matters to you is part of the equation. It really is this capacity to idealize the caregivers and what matters to them. Christian.
I got a big devil's advocate kind of thing for you. I have a notion that like what you're
There's
describing.
no devil.
I don't know what the I don't know any of the demons. The Mara. I have a Mara's advocate position.
What's that?
Well, I wonder if like what you're describing in the avoidance system actually kind of happens in the secure system to a maybe a lesser extent, where like how could we avoid getting our values except for from our family, from the people around us? Like, don't you think that even in the secure system, the child is kind of still being trained in subtle ways, maybe not so like in such a kind of rigid way to like along certain lines of what to value or what not to?
No, I totally think that that's true.
So
But I
then,
don't think it contradicts my point of view.
maybe I kind of wonder where the split happens then along those lines, or maybe I kind of missed it and you were describing that.
So the secure family system is really oriented toward the needs of the child. And the family system that produces dismissing people is really oriented toward the needs of the caregiver. That's the fundamental difference.
Okay.
So that when the child in the secure family system is encouraged to do things, they're encouraged to do the things that have real interest for the child. Yes, there's lots of things that the child needs to do in order to develop, and in a family system where children are considered each time they progress to the point where there's another capacity that needs to be developed, the challenges for them are increased so that they can develop and flourish. But in neglecting systems, the child really isn't considered in that way. the child is expected to do the things that they're expected to do. An example might be a secure child is expected to eat when they're hungry, and a dismissing child is expected to eat when dinner is served.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Gotcha. So there's just a more careful attention to the sort of rhythms of the child, but the child is still ultimately getting its interests kind of from the family system, maybe in subtle ways.
Well, the capacity of the caregivers is always involved in that. What can they recognize? What can they support? What resources does the family system have to offer the child? Another way to put it would be the do you have much of a food palette? Do you like a variety of foods, or is it quite limited? One of the things about developing the capacity to taste different kinds of food and enjoy them is an early history of the family providing for you a variety of foods and insisting that you try them so that you develop the capacity to eat them. Because once you get past puberty, it's very hard to develop or increase your palate beyond what you learned in childhood. So that a child who likes certain foods and then is encouraged to explore the flavors of those foods and is very different than a child who is simply given what the caregivers think that they should have without the interest of the child in it. But I remember those, you might even call them battles, where the child is being offered broccoli and the child is not eating the broccoli, but they still have to take a bite. You know, take a bite of this. No, I don't want it. Take a bite. Come on, take a bite. And then they take a bite, or a pea, or a bean, or all of the different things that might increase their knowledge, but there's still some feedback from the child, as opposed to in a home where they're just given the meal and they're told to clean the plate.
Mhm.
You know, that making sense?
Yeah. I just have this notion that like there's a big consumerist aspect to that potentially. Like in societies where not a lot of variety of food was available. I know you're using that as an example. Presumably that itself didn't impact the security of the children growing up in those societies.
Well, it depends on, yeah, the resources that are available, but it still has the same effect. If you grow up in an environment that's deprived and everybody is equally deprived, if you go outside of that environment, you still don't have the capacity to taste it.
Okay. Yeah.
What we really need is a sense of being in a family system where, when we express ourselves authentically, we're not frightened by that, where we can be spontaneous and lively, but in a family system where the child has to be attentive to the needs of the parent, that liveliness, that authentic expression is guarded. And in a family system with somebody who grows up to be dismissive, that spontaneous expression is hidden. Quite different. And the child learns to hide it because they can't get the response that they need by making the authentic expression. They have to translate it into an idealized expression in order to get a response, which they learn to do quite easily. So they don't have the concept that that's a problem. They have the concept that you have to be good at that because that's how you get what you want. So in a secure family system where you just are effortlessly authentic and people respond to that in a loving and delighting way, in a family system where you grow up to be dismissing, you get good at reading people and presenting an ideal version, because that's how you get what you want. And if the authentic thing is in contradiction to that, you don't express it. But you look at that as a positive way of navigating the world. You don't look at it as from the perspective of a secure person who knows a different way of being in the world. It's not that you're withholding something that you have, it's that you don't know about it. That isn't how the world ever worked, and that's never how you got anything. And your caregiver is likely, because they also have that skill set, are thinking that this is a good way to raise a child so that they can be skillful, effective in the world. If you grow up in a family system that's chaotic and inconsistent, and it's hard to predict what will happen, you can't reliably predict how you need to respond to get your needs met. And also in those family systems, when you attempt to create a sense of autonomy and a sense of exploration that matters to you, often it interferes with the proximity that the caregiver needs from the child. And so the child's movement into the world is restricted. Or the caregiver role versus the child, so that the child is one of the ways that the caregiver emotionally regulates themselves. And so they're dependent on the child to be present so that they can be regulated by the child, which means the child cannot separate, cannot create a sense of autonomy and go off on adventures to discover the way that the world means something to them. They're restricted in that frame, enmeshed with the caregiver. And in disorganized family systems, of course, because it's on the other side of the trauma line, and there's often abuse or some kind of trauma that affects the child, they're frightened, and frightened to the point that they can't engage successfully or reliably. And that reliability is within themselves. They can't reliably predict what emotional state they're going to be in, enough to know whether or not they can pursue things that have meaning. Once you get past the adolescent part of growing up and you get into the adult world, most of the time what happens in the adult world is based on teams. And if you can't connect to a group of people and join a team in a reliable way, it's hard for you to get carried along in the way that success and involvement in those kinds of endeavors unfold. The thing about achievement, if we can look at this from this frame of the engagement in life and the pursuit of things that are meaningful and the understanding of death, we sort of live in that duality. We're alive and we can pursue the things that have meaning to us, and at the same time we live in this body which is subject to impermanence, old age, sickness, and death, and it is not going to last that long. And it takes a long time to develop the cultural awareness and the skills that you need to be able to operate in society. So really that first 20 years or so is just acquiring the capacities to engage in the world. And then the 20s is really about exploring what might be the thing to do, and then positioning yourself so that at 30, your adult life begins and you can pursue the things that you want to do. If there's been no attention to the things that really matter to you, and there's been no support in exploring and discerning one thing from another so that you can tell which one you like better, if you've really gotten good at either supporting other people's exploration, which is the thing that happens to preoccupied kids, or you've learned to pursue the things that are culturally valuable. So first starting in the family system, where what's valuable in the family system, which develops the skill to elicit what matters, and then recognizing in the wider culture what's remunerative often, because it's really in secondary exploration the gathering of time, energy, and resources to pursue things. But when you get into a place where it is simply the secondary exploration, simply the gathering of time, energy, and resources, and there hasn't been anywhere along the way an instruction in the pursuit of meaning, then that secondary exploration turns into pursuit of material things. And so in our culture, it's really hard to escape this, the big houses, the flashy cars, all of the rest of it that comes with these material-oriented lifestyles that are so highly touted in our capitalist system. There's almost no focus on what's actually meaningful. The meaning is supposed to come from the acquisition of the material success. And that's really the thing that produces this effect of, particularly if you're accomplished at forming goals and pursuing the goals and getting the results of that, this sense of emptiness, not the emptiness of everything, but the emptiness of nothing that you achieve, and the achievement over and over again is unsatisfying when you get there. In the meditation community, we, or at least my experience of it, is that it's like a bell curve of achievement. At one end, people that hardly function, who are trying to get into the game, come into meditation when other means of support in our Western system haven't really solved the problem. I think of that as the preliminary practices of attending to your attachment conditioning, so that you can actually move out of that fearfulness that confines you, both from understanding how to engage in life and also to understand that it's a temporary thing, this human body that we're in. If you're so afraid that you don't pursue the activities of life, that usually is accompanied by an idea that you can do it later. That's the inability to really comprehend the temporary nature of it. If you could really comprehend the limited nature of this human body that we're in, and the shortness of life, that refuge in the idea that we can do it later, that there's going to be time down the line to get to it, goes away, because you recognize that that actually isn't what happens, which is one of the things that propels you into really engaging the experience of the present moment as fully as you can. But when you're met with this fearfulness about even attempting to explore, then we need to find ways to comfort ourselves that we're not really pursuing it, we're not really doing it. And that's usually that we can figure it out and get to it later. On the other end of that bell curve are people that are really good at getting stuff, really good at goals, really good at get winning in the conventional sense of our culture. And that's where this emptiness piece comes in. You get over and over the goals, but they're not satisfying. You get a new car, and the thrill of the new car lasts for a couple of weeks, and then it's just a car. You purchase something, and there's a little bit of a dopamine rush in acquiring, but that doesn't last. And then in order to repeat that dopamine rush, you have to get another thing. We get engaged in this minute examination of the social positioning that we're in, and we get involved in these machinations to climb up the social ladders that we largely create in our own mind, what's valuable and what isn't valuable, who's interesting, who is interesting, what is access, what is not access. But always when we achieve that, we come into a place of emptiness if it's not oriented around primary exploration, if it's just oriented around that secondary exploration. So that really drives this consumption that we experience so often in our culture. So on that end of this bell curve, the people in the middle are going at it in a way that keeps them engaged in it. They're not at the one end where they can't really get into it, so that there's that drive to get into it, and they don't win so easily that they have that sense of emptiness. They're really engaged in the surviving in our system more, which really often precludes this whole conversation from happening. They're just keeping their head above the water, which consumes all of the resources. One of the things about just really settling in to examining whether the pursuits that you engage have an intrinsic meaning to them or not is that you're well positioned to reorient toward primary exploration from secondary exploration, because you're good at exploring, so that you can begin to evaluate for whether it means something or not. And in shifting that subtly toward, it's really a subtle shift from the acquiring of resources to the acquiring of meaning. In the beginning, of course, if it's really restricted, then you don't know what to do or what to look at. And the great opening there is that you can really go for or at anything and make an evaluation of whether it's meaningful or not. We sometimes then reflect back in our understanding of our own childhoods or adolescence, or when we were younger, about what caught our attention in terms of meaning, and then go back and begin to try it again. But the truth is, we're quite different than we were then, even though the sense of self can find and create a sense of consistency to what we were like in the past. Often we are quite different than we were. The body is different. Our capacities cognitively are different. What's happened to us along the way has affected us. And so the idea then is to really push into what it is that's going to be meaningful for us now, and not, I don't think, going back and attempting to revive something from before. Is that making sense? I can give you an example. When I was in my 20s, I was really quite good at throwing pots, and I really enjoyed doing it. And in my 60s, I went and took a pottery class to see whether I might want to revive my interest in throwing pots. And the 20-year-old body that could easily throw 25 pounds of clay into a pot, I was having trouble throwing a pound of clay into a coffee cup because of the physical strength that it took. And the contrast was shocking, because I didn't imagine myself to be so physically different in my late 60s from the way that I was in my 20s, which is probably not an experience that anyone else had of me, but it certainly was the one that I held internally. So really the thing is, what can you do now? What is the thing that will resonate now from the perspective of where you are now? And then to pursue that. In each moment of engagement, of course, if you're monitoring for meaning, then you have a sense of what is more meaningful and what is less meaningful. And that really is the way that you direct yourself toward things that are more meaningful. And in each of these activities that are selected, each engagement that is selected, the evaluation for meaning, this is quite different from the evaluation of whether it's providing resources or not, because often the things that provide meaning are not. So unless I think that you're lucky in a way that you're the things that are naturally meaningful to you line up with the way that our culture is. I didn't act, as a gay person in our culture. It's so far removed from what's valuable in this culture, and it's a constant affront, just engaging the culture the way that it is. So often, ordinarily rejecting that that didn't happen. But then you have to look at who you are and what our culture values and where that fits in. And also, I guess in my age, maybe it's different, although I don't suspect it's that much different for younger people coming in now. There's more of a presence and more of a more space. It's not illegal. But I still think we'd probably be inhibited to hold hands and walk down the street with somebody in areas that we weren't sure were going to be receptive to it. And then where do you fit into all of that apparatus of our culture and the valuations of it? That doesn't matter so much as evaluating what's meaningful and what isn't meaningful in a moment, in an activity, so that you can organize and move in the direction of meaning. And then over time, it begins to distill. You begin to recognize the capacity for meaning in things, and it gets easier to navigate through things. And you learn which things don't provide much meaning, and so you don't have to engage in them as long. You can recognize the signs of something that can be fruitful and something that isn't likely to be fruitful. And you move in that direction. Of course, what happens socially is that you encounter people that are also engaged in activities that are meaningful to you. And so it begins to change the whole framework of the social network that you're in. It isn't only art, of course, that we're talking about here, or some kind of creative endeavor like that. But the pursuit of spiritual meaning is also a creative endeavor. Sitting in meditation is a creative endeavor, and the better you are at discerning what provides meaning and what doesn't provide meaning, and what avenues of exploration in meditation are more fruitful, you can then direct your practice in a way that actually it provides for you the things, that deep sense of meaning that we want. Christian.
George, I have this notion that the worst part, the biggest bummer for Sisyphus is when he's at the top of the hill and he sees the boulder back at the bottom. But if he just picked a bigger hill, then that would solve the whole thing. You just gotta pick some kind of thing that you'll never get to, and then maybe that solves the problem.
Well, the liberation of Sisyphus, I think, is actually in changing the mind. Remember that Sisyphus has been punished for infidelity with the gods Palamore, which then Sisyphus takes on the responsibility for that, and the punishment, of course, is to push the rock up the hill, but always to stumble and have the rock roll down, so that the punishment is never ended. And so the idea is to recognize that the punishment is over, and just let the boulder roll down the hill and walk over the hill. So the way I envision it is, it's a stark, colorless, barren landscape, and then you change your mind about it, and then you let the boulder roll down the hill, and when you break over the top of the hill, it is full color, forest, rich, everything. That's kind of how I see it.
Okay.
That
was-
when you hmm?
I was thinking more is just, it's just another side of a hill. It's just downhill all the way. When you get stuck.
You don't have to carry the burdens of your conditioning. You don't have to carry the limitations of your family system. You can recognize that you don't have the obligation to carry them forward, and you can let them go. And that's another actually avenue into this thing that provides a sense of emptiness when you achieve it. If you grow up in a family system that's very oriented, around social hierarchy and very oriented around money, you can be directed into activities that will produce high social value, produce more money, but will not necessarily meet what is meaningful to you. And then you can achieve in those and do well in that, and do well for the family, and at the same time be completely empty in the achievement of it. And often there's a sense of guilt, a corrosive kind of guilt, or even a shame that you need to do this for the family system, and that you don't have the authorship or the autonomy to move into a direction of something that might be better in terms of meaning. So that's also part of changing your mind. And really what we're talking about is, again, this freedom not to be engaging in life and not confined by the fearfulness. Often in family systems where there's so much pressure to achieve the abandonment experience if you don't do well in the way that the family wants, is so frightening that it limits your ability to actually pursue outside of the frame that you're being directed toward. Now, the family is most of the time doing this from a place of, this is going to be good for you, and you're going to be appreciative of it, and it is going to be something that you find valuable. But if you're coming to a place where you have achieved, and you've achieved what the family demanded of you, and it's still empty in a way that feels desperate or despairing, then the reorientation then is not so much in the direction of those obligations, but in the direction of meaning, which certainly does not mean you should throw out all of that skill that you've developed, which is also something that happens. I notice in talking to people is that they've ended up in a place where they don't really value any of it, but they're quite skilled, and they want to start over with something else. And that also is in some sense a denial of the impermanence of the human form. It isn't so much a starting over as it is a pivot into the next direction, if you can, not always, if you can. That making sense? So if you find that you're empty in the emptiness of nothing, not the emptiness of everything, in the pursuits of the things, and you pursue pretty well, then it's just the shift away from secondary exploration into primary exploration, what's meaningful. It's hard to pin down exactly the formula for what's going to be meaningful for you, because your conditioning is your conditioning, and because everybody's conditioning is different, it's a different map for them. So it really is just this process of examining the thing that you're doing for the meaningfulness of it, the engagement in the activity that provides a sense of meaning, a sense of well-being, a sense of value, and then including that in the calculations for what to do. Make sense? So why don't we do a little meditation? All right, let go of the meditation. How's that? So we have a level 2 coming up in September, if you want to jump onto the attachment experience. And then we have a couple of day-longs coming up in the fall. One is on exploration, and one is on exploration, and I'm going to talk about photography. So the first one is really about using meditation as a means of exploring, and the second one is some outside activity. And then we're going to schedule some level 1s in support of a level 2 that's going to start in January. So that's what's coming up. Really appreciate your practice. I offer the teaching freely, but then I hope that you'll support it through a donation. You can make a donation on the website. Any amount is helpful. Really appreciate your practice. Hope to see you soon.